Welcome to Paranormal PTSD Recovery, the podcast where we explore the paranormal world to validate people's experiences, look at the research, and talk about the trauma that connecting with the unknown can produce. If you checked out episode 5 with Steve Aspen, that also dropped today, you may be on board with the idea that intergenerational abduction by extraterrestrials is a thing. And if that's a thing, then you know that intergenerational trauma is too. I'm your host, Laura Giles, and today we're delving into the fascinating world of epigenetics, historical case studies of generational trauma, and practical steps for breaking the cycle of trauma. By the end of this podcast, you'll have a good idea whether or not you're dealing with intergenerational trauma and what to do about it. That's my goal. If you're digging the show, please show some love by liking or commenting. As a brand new show, we're absolutely buried in the bottom of the barrel, and your comments will help us to make our way up where we can be found. So thanks in advance. Now, trauma is a profound experience, and its impacts aren't confined to just one individual or even one generation. All you have to do is look at the offspring of Holocaust survivors, slavery, or war refugees to see that that's true. If you're into TV shows, Steven Spielberg's miniseries Taken from 2002 is an excellent example of intergenerational trauma caused by paranormal experiences. The timeline runs from 1944 to 2002 and looks at 4 generations of people who were impacted by alien contact. Some of the experiencers feel that the contact is positive. Some feel it was negative, but the series does a really great job of portraying intergenerational trauma. I think it might be a little easier for some people to see too, because we're often blind to our own situations. If we grew up with poverty, for example, we might miss how that shaped us, especially if we grew up in a community of that, where everyone's at, because that was our whole lives. So looking at it from a different angle may help you to see it better. So how does trauma get passed down? That may be a little confusing. We don't tend to think of it like the color of your hair that gets passed down through the genetics, or like a cold that gets passed down through germs. No, I'm talking about epigenetics. And epigenetics is the study of how behavior and environments can cause changes that affect the way our genes work. Unlike genetic changes, epigenetics changes are reversible and don't change the DNA sequence, but they can change how the body reads a DNA sequence. This means that our experiences, particularly traumatic ones, can leave marks on our genes, which can then be passed on to the next generation. One study that stands out in my mind on epigenetics involves mice and cherry blossom scent. So researchers exposed male mice to the smell of cherry blossoms while simultaneously delivering mild electric shocks. Unsurprisingly, the mice developed a fear response to the scent because neurons that fire together wire together, right? Well, what was astonishing was that their offspring and even the next generation exhibited fear response to the cherry blossom smell, despite never having been shocked themselves. This study highlights how trauma-related behavior can be inherited, influencing descendants long after the initial traumatic event. Pretty cool, right? Another compelling example comes from human history. Back in the winter of 1944 and 45, there was a famine in Holland that killed 20,000 people and left many more suffering. Pregnant women who endured the famine gave birth to children who were smaller and had higher rates of health issues. More intriguingly, these effects were observed in their grandchildren as well. Research indicated that the famine had altered the children's genes in a way that predisposed them to cardiovascular problems, obesity, and mental health issues later on. They also had shorter lifespans than Dutch people born before or after the famine. Lots of scientists have also looked at the impact of a mother's stress level during pregnancy. Elevated cortisol levels in pregnant women, which comes from stress or trauma, have been shown to affect the developing fetus. These children can be more susceptible to anxiety, depression, and other stress-related disorders later in life. The cortisol crosses the placenta and influences fetal brain development, essentially programming the child's stress response system to be more reactive. Crazy, right? trauma isn't just about what happens to you, it's cultural, transpersonal, and generational. Cultural trauma can be seen in communities that have faced collective historical injustices like slavery, genocide, and colonization. Transpersonal trauma refers to the trauma that affects groups and can be felt by individuals within those groups, even if they haven't directly experienced the traumatic events themselves. Generational trauma, as we've discussed, is trauma passed down through family lines. So how do you know if you're dealing with generational trauma? Here are some signs. First one is unexplained anxiety or depression. This is most of my client load. You know that meme, I woke up like this, and that supposedly shows people in their untouched morning beauty. They usually look slightly rumpled, but actually quite beautiful. Well, instead of looking fresh and lovely, some people wake up with anxiety or depression, or both, and nothing's happened. The day hasn't even started, and they're already worried, overthinking, or really down. That's not normal. Emotions are supposed to be reactions to events, not states where we live. There are other explanations for unexplained anxiety or depression, like head trauma, exposure to toxins, like pharmaceuticals or American food supply, or health problems like thyroid or adrenal issues. So you need more than just this symptom to say, oh, that's me, I've got intergenerational trauma. You have to look at the big picture. So let's look at some more signs. And the second one is hypervigilance. Hypervigilance is a constant state of alertness, as if you're waiting for something bad to happen. In fact, a lot of my clients even say that they're anticipating something bad happening. It's like they can feel it coming on, and it can seem like a second sense, but it's really probably hypervigilance, because I bet that most of the time nothing bad actually happens. So it's not an omen or a feeling, it's a fear. And I've gotten some pushback from clients who don't want to let this go because they feel like if they're on guard, nothing can sneak up on them. And then they feel safer and more prepared for the bad stuff when it comes. But this isn't actually true. We're more effective when we meet danger or stressful conditions in a calm brain than a hyper alert one, because we're more likely to make rash decisions if we're amped up, and wrong decisions. So hypervigilance is not your friend, and it's a sign of intergenerational trauma. Another sign is emotional dysregulation. This just means that you can have big emotions. They're difficult to handle, and you may feel out of control a lot. It's like things happen to you and you're reactive, not responsive. All people have things happen to them and that are not within their control or what they want. We can all become overwhelmed, but if you live here, it's a sign of intergenerational trauma. Another one is attachment issues. Do you have a hard time feeling safe in friendships, in your family, at work, or in romantic relationships? Are you part of the team or an outsider? Are you clingy? Do you have your own desires, or do you please others? Do you chase relationships? Do you run from relationships? Either one can be a sign of trauma because we respond to hurt in different ways. Some of us chase reassurance and connection, and others push it away. And some go back and forth between them. And an I love you, no, I hate you type of pattern. It's all about unhealthy attachment and trauma. Another sign of intergenerational trauma is patterns of dysfunction. This is about repeating cycles of behavior seen in previous generations, such as substance abuse or abusive relationships. If your parents were alcoholics or drug addicts, and this generation is too, that's a huge giveaway. Or they say that it skips a generation. This is still a sign that it's intergenerational trauma, because whether you engage in drinking too much or stay totally away from alcohol or drugs, the focus is still on substance. And as long as substance is the center of attention, you haven't healed anything. Not using isn't enough. You have to heal the underlying issue. The drinking or using is just the chosen method of coping with the trauma. It's not the trauma itself, even though using substance can cause a lot of damage. So if your parents had issues and you have issues, that's a sign of intergenerational trauma. Another one is defensiveness. If you have your walls up, don't listen, aren't open, and avoid people and criticism, you might have intergenerational trauma. If you see this pattern in your family, big red flag. Healthy people can hear criticism. They can take feedback without imagining that it's an attack or that the person giving it thinks that they're a piece of crap. It's not personal when you're healthy. It may not even be valid, but you can still say thank you or nothing at all. So there is nothing to be defensive about. Conversations don't trigger an alarm. Another sign is what we call learned helplessness. Learned helplessness is an I give up attitude. It's believing that your efforts can't make any difference, so why try? It can appear that you're content because essentially your actions are saying, I'm going to stay right here. If you know anyone whose father was a coal miner, they're coal miners, and their kids are coal miners or farmers or lower socioeconomic careers, that's exactly what I'm talking about. There's absolutely nothing with doing any type of work, especially if you love it. But when you do it because you think that all the doors are not open to you, that's learned helplessness. It doesn't take long to learn helplessness. There's this video of a teacher telling her students that they're going to play a game. She gives students in the class a piece of paper with words on it where the letters have been scrambled. They have to figure out what the words are. Then she asks them to put up their hands when they have the first word. Half the class hands shoot up. Then she tells them to do the next one, and again, half the class hands shoot up. And then they move on to the third word, and the same thing happens. But here's what the teacher doesn't tell them. Half the class got easy words. The other half got two groups of letters scrambled that didn't make any words at all. And it was impossible to answer. But everyone got the same third word. So even though the half that got the hard words got the same third word, most of them gave up and didn't even try because they couldn't figure out the first two. All that happened in 10 minutes or less. So you see how fast it is to reach the it's no use, I give up state. It's not some exceptional thing that has to do with school kids. It's most of us. It's why you can have a plantation full of slaves and one master and one overseer and nobody left. It's why the detainees in the ghettos during World War II didn't overwhelm the guards and flee. It's why the passengers on flights that took down the Twin Towers didn't attack the hijackers. Somebody knocks someone in the face, shows a gun, shoots somebody, and we're all sheep. It's an extreme example, but it's a true one. Nobody wants to be hurt. Nobody wants to be wrong, so we shut up, don't stand out, and we do what we're told because trauma is about perceived control. If we feel that we have no control, we stop trying, we give up. We may not have control over our bodies in certain circumstances. People can take our money. They can drown out our voices. They can do all kinds of things, but one thing another person can never do is control your mind. You always have control over your thoughts. You can always have dignity and inner peace. And if you choose that, you're always free. Now, just a little sidebar. If you live in a family who stays in their lane, has no ambition or drive to do things, and feels that there's no way out, you probably got intergenerational trauma. The next sign goes right along with this, and it is social influence. This means that something bad didn't happen to you, it happened to your parents or their parents. But their stories become your stories, and they're always horror stories. For example, if your parents were brown-skinned in the 60s in the southern United States, there's a good chance they faced racism during the civil rights movement. Maybe they were spit on, shoved, intimidated, or even beaten. Maybe further back in their family tree, they knew somebody who was lynched, all because of their skin tone. And the family story is that it's better to be light-skinned. Light-skinned people are more beautiful, they have better hair, more opportunities, are happier, and are just all around better people. And the dark-skinned people are the opposite. And even though they will say how horrible it was to be treated this way, they still talk like this. And this is a form of Stockholm syndrome, which is a trauma response that keeps the trauma going. Because here's the thing, trauma isn't what happens to you. It's about the story you tell about what happens to you. So if the story is, I was treated badly because I'm dark-skinned, that will influence the way that you move in the world. Then you give that attitude to your children, and they give it to their children because kids don't just get our genes, They're socialized to think like us and take on our prejudices and emotional wounds. If your story is bad people do bad things, your life's going to look a lot different, right? Carl Jung said, nothing affects the life of a child as much as the unlived life of its parents. And this is what he means. Whatever the parent hasn't healed becomes the burdens of the child to carry. And my last sign of intergenerational trauma is a lack of commitment in you and your family members. What I mean is commitment to be here, to work, to love, to live, to engage with life. If life is about escape through drugs, alcohol, vacations, sitting in front of the TV, video games, work, study, or doing whatever you do to be a human doing versus a human being, that could be a sign of intergenerational trauma. Escape is a fear of intimacy. It's why we also fear abandonment, because why do we fear intimacy? Because we think we're going to get close and vulnerable and then left behind. So we don't engage to protect ourselves from inevitable hurt. Well, guess what, guys? Life is nature. And in nature, everything ends. That's part of it. Living is the most dangerous thing you'll ever do because none of us get out of it alive. So you might as well go for it. And the end is already programmed for all of us. It's a known. So live dangerously. Commit to what you love. Commit to what you desire. Go for it. Living small and safe is an illusion. We all die in the end. And the sooner you accept that, the sooner you can live consciously and fully and break the trauma cycle. We're 6 episodes in, and I'm giving you 2 of my favorite quotes already. And the first one by Carl Jung, I just gave you. The other one is by Bob Marley. And he said, the truth is, everyone's going to hurt you. You just got to find the ones worth suffering for. And I truly believe that. Not because people are cruel, but because we act in our own self-interest. And there will come a day when what I want clashes with what you want. Chances are I'm going to go for what I want or need rather than what you want or need. And that's going to hurt. Or I won't, and then I'll give up myself for your sake and I'll be hurt. Either way, someone's going to be hurt. Not because we're bad people, but because that's the nature of life. And if you live without commitment to play the game, you're probably impacted by interpersonal trauma. And I'll give you one more. That's suicidality. Suicide doesn't typically happen as a one-off type of event. There's a family pattern. A cousin, uncle, grandfather, someone else has committed suicide, and probably lots more who have tried it. I had a client who had this whole passel of first-generation relatives who committed suicide. It's an epidemic. If that's not a wake-up call to do something different, I don't know what is. When someone has a mental illness, it's not because something is wrong with them. It's because something is wrong with the family and the society. We're all connected. We create families, neighborhoods, communities, and societies together. It's very difficult for someone to heal their trauma within the family because that's the environment that created it. And yet it's also hard to heal unless the family heals. So it becomes a choice of me or them. And when someone suicides, they make the choice that they're the ones who are checking out. Intergenerational trauma is a social issue, a family issue, and a personal one. When it's not healed, it gets passed down and becomes a bigger burden to the next generation. And now we're at a crisis stage because there aren't too many people who aren't impacted by this. So let's talk about how we can break the cycle of intergenerational trauma. You know, I had some suggestions. The first one is awareness and education. Most of my clients were unaware that they were experiencing trauma when they came to me. They thought they were having relationship problems or feeling depressed. With paranormal PTSD clients, they might think that being melancholy or high-strung runs in the family. No, it's intergenerational trauma. And sometimes it's paranormal PTSD. And once we have a name for it, we can talk about it. We can be informed so it's not as scary and we're not ignorant. There's a lot of awareness campaigns, and awareness isn't healing. It's just the start of the conversation. So the next step is radical honesty. Post-traumatic stress disorder thrives on fear, guilt, and shame. And when you shine a light of truth on that, all that begins to lose its power. Not because the bad wasn't bad, but because it's not happening now. This moment is different. You have choices in this moment, and it's all brand new. If you're not hiding your fear, not hiding what happened, and not hiding your pain, something wonderful can happen. Your curiosity can blossom. Your courage, forgiveness, strength, and all the other things that you are have space to be present. And that black spot is just a tiny part of your life. It's not your whole life, and it doesn't feel overwhelming anymore. And this is why once a month in my private group, we have a group chat where anyone can speak about whatever they want to talk about. How many safe spaces are there to talk about paranormal PTSD? If I'd guess, I'd say not many. So this is a way to start the practice of being honest and witnessing others be honest about their experiences, their feelings, and their desires. I grew up with this. I know that this has contributed a lot to my resilience, and I think it will for you too. So be honest. Truth is absolutely a key to healing. The next suggestion for healing intergenerational trauma is, and these are in random order, it's cultivating a community mindset. What makes us vulnerable to trauma is solitude. In tribal societies, hardship and triumph are shared. When a hero comes home, he tells his story, the tribe holds him up and shares his glory, and his triumph is their triumph. It's part of their collective story. When a soldier comes home after war, something similar happens. So he's purified, so he doesn't bring the taint of war into the community. Then he tells his story so that this hardship and burden of the hard things that he had to do on behalf of the community is shared. And this is how they deal with PTSD. The soldier isn't alone with his story or the horror, it's shared. And this is part of cultivating a community mindset. It's about care over competition. It's about coming from a space of power with instead of power over. When we're using power with, we're thinking of mutual support and benefit. When we live in power over, it's where it's about competition, getting over on someone else, getting a better deal at their expense, and using fear, domination, and control to get our needs met. Fear sustains trauma. The way out is love. If you want out, the way to use your power has to shift, and the way you see people does too. We thrive in community. Humans are tribal people. We need each other, and we have to stop isolating and connect. Okay. Another step, and this is very basic and essential, is self-care. Because of intergenerational trauma, lots of parents these days don't teach their kids how to be self-sufficient. They try to protect them from harm, which is good, but they also want to protect them from stress, which is not good. Life is hard. If you don't learn how to deal with stress, you're going to have a very hard road ahead. And lots of teenagers can't get themselves out of bed. They can't manage their time. They can't make their own meals or clean up. And they can't do their own laundry or manage their money because they never had to. They can't manage their emotions either. They can't even think for themselves, and they say, there's no toilet paper, but they don't have the foggiest idea of what to do next because they never have to think. A parent's job is to rear self-sufficient kids, and this is not how to do this. These kids are already disconnected from others because they don't really develop other awareness. Their life revolves around them, and when they're subjected to stress, they often disconnect from themselves. They aren't uncomfortable laying around in bed all day, day after day in the same clothes because they aren't even here. For this generation, suicide is an option because they weren't really all that plugged in anyway. So self-care sounds like such a basic and easy thing, but it's not if you have post-traumatic stress disorder. It can feel like a huge mountain to climb, but a very necessary one. A couple of years ago, Jordan Peterson came out with advice for young people to change their lives, and it broke the internet. Do you know what he said? He said, make your bed. Can't tell you how many times I've heard people tell me that that was the best thing they ever heard. So if you haven't heard that one yet, you're hearing it now from me. Brush your teeth, go to sleep and wake up at the same time every day, exercise, eat fresh alive foods, take a time out, don't go every moment, and make your bed. Families with intergenerational trauma are chaotic. Having an order to your day will give you a lot of peace of mind. Now, my next suggestion is to engage in creativity. You might be thinking, wait, when are you going to talk about trauma treatment? Trust me, I am. Trauma bait is left brain dominant. It's focused on overthinking so you don't miss a threat or do the wrong thing. It's always on alert. It's not restful or happy. And when you're playing and in a creative state, you're telling the brain that everything is okay. We can relax. There is no danger here. So you're teaching it to break out of that trauma pattern. And that might seem like a stupid thing to do if you're faced with the threats of aliens or ghosts coming to visit you at night. Shouldn't you actually be figuring out how to stop it? Well, you actually are when you're playing. Kids learn by playing. If Barbie doesn't have a pink car to drive her to the ball, a little girl might use her brother's dump truck to take her there or a pumpkin as her carriage. The more creative you are, the more outside the box solutions that you can find to every problem. It also helps you to imagine more creative questions so you don't think of the problem in the same predictable ways, and this can lead to new solutions. Another pathway to healing intergenerational trauma is to engage in willingness and resistance. And these are opposite sides of the same coins and are both important to healing. It's about timing. You have to know when to use which skill. The willingness combats the symptom of not wanting to be here. Willingness says, it is what it is, and I'm up for whatever shows up. If you're feeling guilt or anger, be willing to feel what you feel. If someone is treating you badly, be willing to have that experience. I'm not saying you have to sit there and take it. I'm saying this is what life is presenting right now. So be willing to be here. If you want to heal, lose weight, become president, or buy a new car, be willing to take the necessary steps to make it that reality. And resistance really is the other side of willingness. It's about resisting all the things that can take you away from being conscious and peaceful in this moment. So resist escaping through drugs, alcohol, food, exercise, gambling, sex, or whatever your stimulant of choice is. Resist oppression. Being willing doesn't mean you're a doormat. Resist isms that polarize people and make us enemies. We're all in this together. Remember, we created a society where inter-society trauma happened. The way out is to unite and stop the isolation. And I'll add one more. Self-compassion. Be kind to yourself. Acknowledge that healing is a journey and it's okay to seek help. In fact, I highly encourage professional help because trauma is a holistic condition. It impacts the mind, body, emotions, and spirit. And though these are really good strategies that all healthy people can benefit from, it's a lot easier to get to the point where you can do these things if you have professional help from a trauma therapist, not a trauma-informed therapist. That might mean they took one class on what trauma looks like. You want a trauma therapist. Okay. At the beginning of the podcast, I promised you that you'll have a good idea of whether you have intergenerational trauma and what you can do about it if you do. Did I deliver? Let me know in the comments. Also, let me know if there are signs that I missed or strategies for healing that I missed. Let's help each other out. Thank you for joining me on Paranormal PTSD Recovery. If you found this episode insightful, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with others who might benefit from this knowledge. Till next time, take care of yourself and each other. This is Laura Giles signing off, and I hope to see you right back here next week or in my private group. Ciao.